So Dhalia's making some serious noise across Chicago, thanks to the system that Tommy, Claudia, and Lilliana have put in place, and it was always going to catch the attention of the CBI. And Diamond knows that this drug is the future and has the potential to take over the city. And not only does Dhalia have the potential, but after trying and trying, Dr. Williams finally cracked the code to make this cheaper version that can rival the coke and the heroin at street level, and eventually this will hit the CBI business. And with the CBI, we saw Jenard making his own moves with Marshall's cousin Gray. Blaxton is also back, who goes way back with Jenard and Diamond. There's also Adrienne, who's working on Diamond to get a story, but I do think she is falling for him. Now there was also D-Mac, who warned Tommy rather than doing what Jenard said, and JP asking more questions about Kate, and it really is all geared up for Kate Egan to return to the world of power, because Grandma Miriam Egan isn't doing so well, and as usual there's huge issues with the Flynn family, and the latest is caused by Walter Flynn, who described himself as the devil attacking the Serbs, which I do think will come back, but we're gonna run through everything in this review and recap as usual. But let's start with where this episode kicked off, and that was with Dhalia making some serious noise in the clubs, thanks to Lilliana, and this new courier system that Claudia and Lilliana put in place, where they were giving a taste of Dhalia to their customers, similar to how Claudia did with Tommy. And Dhalia was catching like wildfire, but Tommy warned Claudia not to get ahead of herself, because quality control is everything, and they need to create the hype and demand before the supply, and that's because Claudia wants to go bigger, but she's talking to someone who's experienced in the game, and Tommy's been in this game long enough to know that everybody can't afford Dhalia at its current price anyway, and this is why he wanted to create an affordable version, because once these street junkies started to buy Dhalia, they would never go back to the regular coke, which would put people at the CBI in a sticky situation, eventually forcing them to source the product from the only people that can give it to them, and that's Tommy, Claudia, and Lilliana. But this was met with resistance from Dr. Williams and Claudia, because Claudia wanted to keep this designer drug and keep it exclusive, and Dr. Williams didn't want to compromise on quality, because it is hard to crack the formula, because shit can go wrong, and the last thing they need is for bodies to drop on the streets. But Tommy wants every single crew in Chicago on his list, and the only way he can do that is if they knock the price down and make it affordable. Now the one role that Tommy had Lilliana playing was being in charge of Dr. Williams, so we saw her learning and taking every single thing on board that she was doing, because she's also a cook herself, and I really wouldn't be surprised if Lilliana picks up everything and be able to cook Dhalia herself, eventually taking out the doc. But she also knows that someone like Dr. Williams being missing would be questioned, and we saw her playing a role when it came to her work and her date. Now, we also saw Lilliana working with Claudia, where they put this courier system in place, but she was keeping an eye on her at the same time, because she's Tommy's right-hand woman, and every leader needs someone like Lilliana to tell Tommy what's up, with Claudia trying to make a move on Vic, but to also slow down on Dr. Williams, because he can't push too hard, otherwise they'll never win, and he needs to have a balance. But Tommy's someone who wants to prove himself, because he's never had anything that's his, and those around him, especially Ghost, started to want something else, but not him. He's always been about the streets, and he definitely is running his own shit now, and he definitely made himself heard loud and clear when he warned Claudia that she can't be pulling moves that she made with Vic Flynn. But this was always going to happen because Claudia is someone who wants to make a name and send a message, but if they start making moves of their own and go behind each other's backs, then this is when shit gets fucked up, just like we're seeing with Jenard and Diamond. So there needs to be this trust between them, and that includes knowing about the two guys that were put on her by Walter Flynn for protection, who Tommy killed by the way. But before we talk about the Flynns, Dr. Williams did eventually crack the science to make Dhalia more affordable, but how long is she gonna last, that's the question. Because just like Lilliana said, she knows way too much, and at some point, she could be the weak link in their organization. But not if Lilliana knows how to cook Dhalia, because then the doctor becomes replaceable, and this lab is already paid for. But let's talk about the Flynns next, and we all know that Walter Flynn has lung cancer, and it is just a matter of how long he has left. But regardless of how long he has left, he made it clear to Uncle Paulie that he wasn't going to let the Serbs come after his family, and they needed to be ready for when they come back, because they definitely will. But Uncle Paulie warned him that they're not as strong as before. But I guess you could say this isn't just Walter Flynn's fight, there's also Tommy and the CBI who were involved, because I highly doubt the 10% tax that Jenard is putting aside in a bank account is going to suffice with Merkovich, because I'm sure it's going to be along the lines of an eye for an eye. So as much as Walter Flynn hates the CBI, I do think we could see them all coming together at some point to take down a common enemy. And this is why Walter Flynn put all his protection on Claudia, because he knew the Serbs would strike back. But where he said Vic is capable of looking after himself, so is Claudia, and we know why, because she killed Mai and Reggie, where she did pull the trigger, and he really is underestimating what Claudia is capable of, and he's only gonna find out when he puts a gun in her hand, where he's got no choice but to trust her. And 4 Stars did release this image on St. Patrick's Day, which is something we've not seen before, but we do see Vic, Walter, and Claudia all with guns in their hands. So it does seem like Walter Flynn will put some faith in his daughter eventually, or she'll give him no choice. But elsewhere with the Flynns, it does seem like the drive-by was enough to scare Gloria away, because she's gone, and after a lot of drinking in this episode, Vic told Walter that every fight that he got into with Gloria was about this family, and he chose his father every single time. But what does he have to show for it? Definitely not much at all, and that's why he's making his own moves. And Uncle Paulie did warn Walter, love is a torpedo, and this is the one drug you can't control. And if you do try and control this with Vic and Gloria, then all it's gonna do is push Vic away even further, and that's what we're seeing play out. But let's talk about all things CBI, Blaxton, and D-Mac next. Now, Blaxton is someone who has a history with Jenard and Diamond, and his comeback couldn't have been more timely after Elijah being killed. Now, he was someone who left Chicago because he got into some trouble a few years back, but here's where we saw the disagreement start again with Diamond and Jenard, because Marshall and D-Mac pitched a new crew that they could start doing business with, but where Diamond was having none of it, Jenard used it as an opportunity, because that's what he is. He's an opportunist, and he used it to get D-Mac on Tommy again, and where Jenard confirmed that they were going to move behind Diamond's back again, because he was someone who got comfortable only making one move at a time, sitting in his cell. So we saw this look from D-Mac, and rather than getting the jump on Tommy, he warned him that he needs to watch his back, and he didn't need to tell him it was Jenard, because Tommy knows that Diamond has a mutual respect for him, and he knows that D-Mac only takes orders from Jenard after what he saw play out in the barbershop in episode 2. So with Jenard trying to make moves on Tommy, he's gonna find out real soon who he's fucking with. But now we really start to see D-Mac move towards Tommy's side, especially after he was pushed out by Marshall, because Marshall is someone who's trying to get his come up on his own, because Gary is his cousin who he put Jenard in contact with. But now that D-Mac and Marshall have had this little spat and D-Mac warning Tommy, you can really see him moving over to Tommy's side, and then it is only a matter of time before he finds out that Tommy is his uncle. But this is also where Jenard found Dhalia and brought it to Diamond, telling him that they need to get on this shit, because this is the drug that will take over, and where he told Jenard he wasn't interested, his tone was completely different when it came to Tommy. He told him that now he's interested, but even though Tommy said he's heard of it, he doesn't know anything, and he should stick with the classics of powder, cash, rinse, and repeat. But something's different about this drug, and he's not wrong, and I'm sure he has a hunch that Tommy has something to do with it. So let's see what happens with this one. But sticking with Diamond, we saw him with Adrienne again, and she is going to be a problem because she's a journalist and she's after a story. But where she's after a story about a broken nation in Chicago, she's now being asked to get a story about Diamond, the rise and fall of a drug kingpin who may be on the rise again, and maybe they could have a hand in sending him back to prison. But this didn't sit right with Adrienne, and as I mentioned before, love is a drug you can't control, and I do think she'll end up falling for Diamond, but she still is a problem, because does she choose Diamond or does she choose a job? And it is a very similar situation that Tommy finds himself in when it comes to JP, because we saw them continuing their conversation about Tommy being a drug dealer, and with Tommy opening up about Ghost, you can really tell Tommy is definitely still hurting from Ghost's death, and it is still fresh. But this is the reason why Tommy doesn't want JP anywhere near the game, because he's scared that if JP gets involved, he's gonna end up losing another brother. But JP is someone who's moved weight back in the day, and even if he's not moving weight, he's happy for Tommy to wash his money through his club. But Tommy's been there and done that, but let's see if he eventually does take up JP's offer. But this wasn't the only talking point from their conversation. The second was Miriam Egan isn't doing so great, because she had a stroke or aneurysm, and she's in bad shape, and this is why JP wants to call Kate. But where JP wants to forgive and forget, Tommy doesn't want anything to do with Kate, because JP doesn't know what Tommy does, and he wants his own answers. And as I mentioned before in my previous video on JP this past week, the only person that can give him the answers that he's looking for is Kate Egan. Tommy can only tell him one side of the story, but he doesn't have all the answers, so I do think they are gearing up for Kate to return, and it is only a matter of time. So with that being said, That was episode 7 of Force, which was definitely a build-up episode to a crazy episode next week, because episode 8 is always a big one in the Power universe, and I do expect next week to be no different. But drop all your thoughts down below in the comment section, and of course if you're new to the channel and you haven't done so already, then remember to smash the subscribe button if you want to see everything Power Book 4 Force and Power Universe related. But as always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.